right, here in the second part of chapter 3, we'll finish up our systems and then talk more about some of the diseases related to nutrition in our body systems. All right, so section 3.8, looking at the digestive system, which is, of course, the one we'll spend the most time on as far as relating to nutrition. So that digestive system, of course, is made up of the GI tract, but also accessory structures, and this includes the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So multiple organs here in this system. Its job is to do all the processing that helps with, of course, digestion, but then absorbing those nutrients and getting rid of waste. So most of that digestion and absorption is under autonomic control. We don't think about absorbing food or breaking down food. It happens automatically. And then that's controlled by signals from the nervous system, as well as hormones from the endocrine. So that's why those systems are important to talk about as well. All right, so just some of the terminology that goes along with this. Of course, digestion is just taking large molecules and either mechanically, thinking about chewing, or chemically, all the different enzymes, breaking them down into the basic nutrients, and then those nutrients are what gets absorbed through the wall of the GI tract into our cells. And absorption just means taking up from the fluid in the GI tract and entering then into the bloodstream or the lymph. So remember, water soluble goes to the liver and into the blood, fat goes into the lymph. The GI tract or gastrointestinal tract is just where the majority of digestion and nutrient absorption is occurring. And it's made up of the mouth, the esophagus, down to the stomach, small and large intestines, then to the rectum and out through the anus. So all of those collectively make up the tract. Now that's not the digestive system. Again, there are other organs involved there too, like the liver, but the GI tract is essentially where food and nutrients enter and then where they exit. Then our other term here, lumen, is just a hollow opening that's inside of a tube, for example, the GI tract. All right, so this is looking at that GI tract. So again, starting at the mouth. So of course, its job, it releases saliva that helps chew up our food. So thinking about mechanical digestion, but also enzymes get released there. From the mouth, we go down the esophagus that's lubricated with that mucus, and that lands us into the stomach. Of course, this is where we're going to have a lot of acidic environment here to dissolve, kind of help break down some food. It also kills and gets rid of a lot of microbes that protect us from disease. But it also is involved in other things too, as far as regulating the emptying of that food and other functions. From there, we're going into the small intestine. This is where the majority of digestion and absorption is going to occur. So again, most substances get broken down and absorbed here. But then we also have the large intestines, just again, kind of mixing and propelling things forward. We get some absorption here as well. Then that's ultimately going to go into the rectum and the anus. But we also have the liver. So of course, we talked about the hepatic portal that takes those nutrients first to the liver that kind of processes them. This is going to produce and store bile that helps particularly with fat digestion and absorption. And then the pancreas secretes sodium bicarbonate. That's going to offset the acid in the stomach. It also has a lot of different enzymes that are in there to digest carbohydrates and proteins. All right, now the enzymes we talked a lot about here, so just some very general principles about enzymes to either refresh your memory, or if you've not really heard of enzymes before, enzymes are proteins for the most part. They have a very specific shape. This is an example of sucrase. A lot of times they end with ASE, but not all of them. So they have a particular shape, and then somewhere there's some type of pocket or a groove in which molecules can bind, and that pocket or groove is called the active site. So in this case, we're breaking down the disaccharide sucrose, so our table sugar. It's made up of two monosaccharides, glucose and fructose, held together by this bond. So we want to break that bond. So what's going to happen is sucrose is going to bind into that active site on our enzyme, our sucrase. They attach. We need a little bit of water to help with this. And then what that enzyme does is it helps speeds up reactions. Now, it doesn't make something happen that wouldn't happen on its own. It just speeds up the process. So essentially, it's going to break the bond that's holding those two monosaccharides together. It then releases them individually as glucose and fructose. They go on to be metabolized by our cells or stored if we don't need energy. And then the cool thing about proteins is after they're done working, they go right back to their original shape and we reuse them over and over again. All right, so if we start in the mouth, again, that mechanical chewing is where we're going to start digestion. Our taste buds that are on there, this is where we taste. So remember, this is our number one kind of reason for choosing the foods that we do. So we have a few different things. So we have sweet and sour, salty and bitter. Those are the ones we're most familiar with. But we also have a couple others you may not be as familiar with. Then we also have umami and oleogustus taste buds, and the two that you're probably least familiar with there. So the umami, this is kind of the brothy, kind of meaty flavor that we taste, and then the oleogustus is actually the flavor of fat that gets detected there. Also, our sense of smell greatly contributes to the taste of foods. All right, now as far as digestion, our saliva has an important role in digestion. So of course, just the watery fluid released by the salivary glands in the mouth. So it lubricates, but also again, has lots of enzymes in there. For example, amylase. Again, remember enzymes often end with ACE, you see here. So amylase breaks down starch, lipase or lipid, so it breaks down fats. And then it also has a mucus in there that is released or secreted from the cells, and that can help lubricate and then protect our cells as well. So again, just kind of thinking about some of the secretions here. So again, the saliva gets released from the mouth. It has a lot of those enzymes in it. The mucus, it gets released by quite a few organs that make up that tract to help protect the GI tract and lubricates food as well as it travels down so it doesn't get stuck. Again, lots of enzymes get produced by the mouth, the stomach, the small intestine, and the pancreas that promote digestion of all of our food as well, that then leads to that absorption. And then, of course, the stomach acid that's released helps break down food, but it also gets rid of pathogens or microbes to help our immune system. Some minerals get solubilized there at the lower pHs, and it can actually activate some enzymes. The bile that gets released by the liver that's stored in the gallbladder, this mainly helps with fat digestion. So people with gallbladder issues often have a hard time digesting fatty foods. Bicarbonate gets secreted by the pancreas and small intestine. That helps neutralize the stomach acidity. Then hormones get released. So again, mainly think about our endocrine system, but the hormones get released from the stomach, but also the small intestine and the pancreas. And that's going to help produce or release some of those acids, some of the enzymes, bile or bicarbonate. It also regulates the movement through or the flow through the GI tract. And then an intrinsic factor released in the stomach helps absorb or helps the absorption of vitamin B12 that's particularly important for our cells. Now, the parts of that GI tract, again, we already talked about the mouth, but also the esophagus, of course, connects the throat to the stomach, the pharynx, mainly we think about with our throat, but it's part of the digestive tract and the respiratory tract at the back of the oral and nasal cavities. The trachea, not part of digestion. That's the airway from the throat to the lungs. So we need to shut that off during while we're eating and drinking. And that's the job of the epiglottis, that flap is going to fold down and cover the trachea so that food doesn't get into our lungs. And then bolus is another term here. This is mixed with saliva and food mass that's swallowed. It's referred to as a bolus. All right, and this is just showing that. So again, here's our bolus of food. Here as it goes to the back of our tongue and to the throat. Again, our epiglottis here is going to shut. That's going to shut off the pathway to the trachea so it doesn't go to the lungs. And then that bolus is going to move down through the esophagus and then into our stomach. Now, the idea of peristalsis, this is the movement, so this muscular contraction that occurs that propels the food down. So again, here's still our bolus. It doesn't just kind of randomly float down through here by gravity, but instead it's the contraction of the muscle that lines the GI tract. As it contracts, it keeps the food moving in one direction. There are also a few sphincters that are within the GI tract. So there's the lower esophageal sphincter. This is a muscle that constricts to prevent things from going backwards. So this prevents things from, this is between the esophagus and the stomach. It's also called the gastroesophageal sphincter or the cardiac sphincter. So it keeps food from going from the stomach back to the esophagus. There's also chyme. And chyme is a mixture of secretions that help digest food. And then we have another sphincter called the pyloric sphincter. Again, that smooth muscle. This is between the stomach and the small intestine. So again, the stomach has a sphincter on both ends, one to prevent things from going back to the esophagus, and one to prevent things from the small intestine from going back into the stomach. All right, so then our stomach here has a few different parts. So again, we have the sphincter that's in here, so that lower esophageal sphincter is going to prevent food from going back up. And then we also have the pyloric sphincter at the end of that. Within the stomach, we have that mucosa, but we also have a lot of cells, again, lined with those epithelial cells for that digestion and that absorption of nutrients into our cells. Right, then our stomach in the upper GI tract. So of course the stomach's a large sac. It can actually hold up to about 4 cups for several hours. Of course, that size varies from individual and can be altered during surgery. This is one way that some individuals who are obese can kind of start that weight loss process that shrinks their stomachs, and then they don't eat as much, and it starts them on better eating habits. Now, the concentration of the stomach acid, though, increases as the food enters, so that gets triggered. Again, that chyme, those different secretions, leaves the stomach about a teaspoon at a time, goes to the small intestine through that sphincter. So again, just kind of, we move from that food bolus, then we digest it a little bit into chyme that then travels to the small intestine. So there's actually very little absorption of nutrients that happens in the stomach. A lot of digestion and breaking down of the food, but not too much is absorbed here. And then again, also we mentioned the intrinsic factor before, but this is a protein-like compound that helps absorb that vitamin B12. Now these gastric juices, mainly made up of acid, again, as we mentioned, breaks down different protein activity, except for the digestive enzymes. They get activated at that low pH, starts the digestion or the breakdown of proteins, and it makes some of the dietary minerals like calcium soluble and helps them get absorbed better. And then that mucus, of course, that a lot of our organs release to lubricate the food as well as protect our cells. Now, once we get into the small intestine, it has 3 different parts. The first segment is called the duodenum, then the jejunum, and then the ileum is the last part. I'm not going to ask you how long these parts are. The numbers are just to give you kind of an idea of the different parts. So the duodenum is going to receive that chyme, that kind of bulk of secretions and food that's in there, all those digestive juices that come from the pancreas and gallbladder. And again, this is where the majority of digestion is going to occur, and then where most of the absorption is going to occur is in the small intestine. It has what are called villi, or these finger-like protrusions that stick out to help absorb the food. Those absorptive cells, as the name implies, these are called enterocytes. They actually line those villi and they absorb all the nutrients. And we have microvilli because they're extremely small, but these are extensive folds on the surface. That combined fold again increases the surface area about 600 times. So it just increases the number of absorptive cells to bring nutrients in to our cells. All right, so again, just kind of looking here at how all of this is organized, showing what these villi and microvilli look like here. Again, it just increases the surface area instead of it being flat, so very little was absorbed, increases the lining there so that more epithelial cells can absorb those nutrients. All right, now talking here, we talked about the cell membrane or the plasma membrane regulating what's coming in or going out. So there are different types of transport or absorption. So some things go through passive diffusion. This is the least used. This just would be molecules that can move from an area of high to low concentration, but it means they can get through that plasma membrane. Again, most things can't because of that hydrophobic barrier. So most of them use facilitated diffusion or active absorption. So facilitated is similar to passive. It's still going from a high to low, but we need one of those carrier proteins to provide kind of a tunnel or a passageway because it can't cross the membrane. Then active is called that because it's going in the opposite direction against the gradient. So it's moving from a low to high amount. So trying to suck up all the glucose, all the nutrients. Once it gets down to low concentrations, we need to use some energy to pump those nutrients into the cells. And then also some phagocytosis and pinocytosis. This is where those cells actually engulf, kind of like they're eating the nutrients and the liquids to bring them into the cells. So kind of in a bulk transport. And this is just showing that process. Again, simple diffusion, it's just moving from a high to low concentration, no help needed. Facilitated, very similar, but we need that transport protein. So this glucose molecule here can't pass on its own, so it needs to go through a transport protein, but still going from a high to low concentration. Active transport still needs a transport protein, but now we're going from a low amount to a high amount, so we need that energy. And then the phagocytosis or pinocytosis, pino is just liquid, phagocytosis is a solid matter. But in either case, the membrane is essentially pinching off. We form this vesicle, and that brings a bulk amount of food or drink into the cells. Now, the parts of our large intestine, so there's the cecum, we have the ascending colon that you can see here, the transverse colon kind of here at the top if we think about it as a U, then the descending colon that goes down as the name implies, and then the sigmoid colon right before we get into the rectum and then the anus. Now the large intestine doesn't have any villi for that like a extreme absorption or any enzymes. It is only producing mucus. Now there is some absorption that occurs, it just doesn't have the extensive villi to increase that. So it mainly is absorbing water, some of the minerals and vitamins. So some of the parts here, of course, this is where our feces would be made. That's mainly made up of the water and then the fiber, the insoluble or the carbs that we can't break down, like cellulose. It can also have some different tissues in there as well. So like blood or some fat tissue. It can have the bacteria that made its way in and now going out, as well as dead cells from the intestine. Now, there's a lot of what's referred to as microbiota, which is a community of microorganisms. So mainly bacteria, but also some fungi, like yeast or some other things as well, but these are microbes, and there are about 500 different types of bacteria that live in the large intestine. And we are learning more and more and more about the benefits and the role of this microbiota, and that's what your discussion question is based on. So because of this large community, there are what are referred to as probiotics. And so these are microorganisms that reside in the large intestine that offer different health benefits. And then there are also prebiotics, and these increase the growth of probiotics. So they're helping them to do better. Then we move into the rectum. So this is the last portion of that large intestine. The muscular movements push the feces into the anus. We have another sphincter here to, again, provide a one-way transport. So there's kind of some internal and an external sphincter. So the external is what's under voluntary control that you would be thinking about in causing to open or close. And of course, relaxation is what allows elimination of the feces. Now, some of the accessory organs that go along here. So we have the gallbladder that is there. So that attaches to the liver, and it stores the bile. Again, it doesn't make it, but it does store it. And that bile is released into the bile duct, into the first part of the small intestine. And again, it's mainly involved in digesting and absorbing fat. The liver, as far as thinking about nutrition, that's where the bile is actually made. It gets stored in the gallbladder, but made in the liver. It also releases unwanted substances to create waste, and then that waste ends up eventually from the small to the large intestine for excretion. Then the pancreas, we mentioned before, especially with insulin and glucagon and regulating those sugar levels, but that produces a pancreatic juice that has water, but also the bicarbonate to neutralize the acid in the stomach and various digestive enzymes. So just kind of looking at these accessory organs. So again, the liver here, the gallbladder right underneath it to store that. Again, we have that common bile duct there that transports from the gallbladder into that the upper part of the small intestine. And then again, we also have the pancreas here to produce some of those hormones as well.